Welcome to lesson 5 of the 28-day embodied confidence bootcamp. This lesson is called The Power of Self-Compassion. And the purpose of this lesson is to help connect us with a tool which can help us with this ability to pause. So if you remember in lesson 4, I reviewed this doubt and confidence loop. And the thing that really helps us get out of our automatic embodied doubt loop and shift into our desired embodied confidence loop is this idea of the pause. So, this ability to be able to pause, notice what's happening, and then consciously choose something else. I'm not going to lie, the pause is a little bit uncomfortable. It feels weird and awkward to shift out of what you're used to doing automatically and unconsciously and choose something else that is not aligned with what you've been doing. There's some discomfort in that. And so self-compassion is a practice that can help us with this ability to stay in the pause, that can help us with the discomfort of that. So how does it do it? What is self-compassion? Self-compassion is the ability to extend care and nurturing to ourselves in times of difficulty and discomfort. Essentially, self-compassion is the ability to treat yourself as you would treat a friend. And so, a lot of times when our friends are going through something that's uncomfortable or difficult, we're able to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that. That is so hard. I wish there was something I could do. I wish I could help." But with ourselves, a lot of times, there's this tendency to judge ourselves, to be hard on ourselves, to berate ourselves, and not be there for ourselves. As we're shifting out of this doubt loop to the confidence loop, there are going to be feelings of discomfort. There's going to be a desire to want to do what you've already been doing. And what we want is the ability to say, "Oh my gosh, this is hard. This is not easy. Look how long we've been giving up on ourselves. I'm sorry you've been going through this." And when we can do that for ourselves, we actually create an expanded capacity to shift. Some of the things that keep us away from self-compassion, there are some myths to self-compassion. So what keeps us away from this ability to be there for ourselves? There's a couple of things. One is that some people think self-compassion is self-pity. So we prevent ourselves from being compassionate to ourselves because we think we're just feeling sorry for ourselves, and that's a form of weakness. Self-compassion is actually not about indulging the whiner in ourselves. It's not about allowing ourselves to whine. It's about allowing ourselves to be with the discomfort. It's about allowing ourselves to take a moment and say, "Hey, this is hard." And when we do that, we actually allow ourselves to step out of the whining. Sometimes the whining is just a need to really want to be heard. I don't know about you, but I know I've done this with my husband, for example. I'll be upset about something and he's not getting it. And so then I'll just keep ratcheting it up. I'm like, "Hey, it was really bad." And I'll just find myself really trying to prove how awful it was as a way of getting some kind of empathy and compassion. And so we'll do that with ourselves. When we're not being heard, we'll start whining and going on because we just want to be heard. We want to be acknowledged. So self compassion actually gets us out of self pity rather than indulging it. There's a myth, and this is a huge one. There's a myth that we will perform better if we're harder on ourselves. There's a myth that if we're hard on ourselves, we're actually going to work harder, strive harder, achieve better, push ourselves harder, and go after bigger goals. But actually, the research that Kristin Neff, she's a preeminent researcher when it comes to self compassion, the research she has found is that the opposite is true. We actually perform better for ourselves when we actually perform better when we are kind to ourselves. And so this is what happens. If we take on some goal in our life and we fail at that goal, and then all of a sudden we have that harsh inner critic that comes online that berates ourselves and says, "Oh my God, how could you have done that? You're such a dummy. You'll never amount to anything." If we have that dynamic going on, and I know I did for years, we actually prevent ourselves from taking on bigger goals. Nobody likes a beating. No one likes a verbal beating, especially when it comes from ourselves. And so we actually will prevent ourselves from taking on those goals because we don't want to verbally beat ourselves up. We don't like that feeling. It doesn't feel good to have that harsh inner critic. So by tapping into self-compassion, what we are allowing ourselves, we're telling ourselves, hey, I'm going to be there for you. If something goes wrong, if this whole thing falls apart, I'm going to be there for you and I'm going to help you through this. And when we have that, when we have ourselves in our back pocket, the research shows we actually take on bigger goals. Another myth of self-compassion is that we only deserve it when bad things happen to us. And I can relate to this one as well, and maybe you can too. So for a while, there was a big martyr in me because I would only allow myself to be kind to myself when bad things happened. And so that's when I would be like, oh my gosh, this is hard. But what Kristin Neff's research tells us is that we are allowed to have access to self-compassion even when we have done things ourselves, even when we have done bad things. And so this can be a hard one for us to accept. So we're trying to develop the capacity to be compassionate to ourselves, not only when bad things happen to us, so not only when we miss the bus or we get into a bad traffic jam or we lose money, not even when those external things happen to us, but when we have done bad things. And so if you're a parent like I am, this can be something that's challenging to tap into. So to have self-compassion for yourself, even when you yell at your kids, even when you have made a mistake at work, like you've forgotten to do something, even in those moments, you deserve self-compassion. You deserve the ability to be able to say, oh gosh, wow, I really yelled at my son today. I must have been really tired. I must have been really stressed. May I be kind to myself right now? So even when you mess up as a human being, and you're going to mess up, you're a human being. Even when you mess up, you have access, you are allowed to be compassionate to yourself. And then the final myth is that self-compassion is selfish, that it's indulgent, that it's something we don't deserve to have access to. And again, for all the other reasons I've already stated, this is not a powerful mindset to have. So we're going to practice cultivating self-compassion. How can we do this? There are 3 steps to self-compassion. Kristin Neff words them a little differently. I've made them all start with the letter N, just so that they're easier to remember. There are 3 steps. One is to notice that you're in some kind of discomfort or difficulty. So bringing it back specifically to this doubt loop and this confidence loop. So we're going to be doing practices where you're going to notice when you actually find yourself falling into doubt. The first step is just to notice, oh, wow, this is uncomfortable. This is something I've been doing for a while. This is hard. Shifting out of doubt and into confidence. This is hard. This is awkward. This is not easy. So the first step is just to notice that there's some discomfort around this or some difficulty around this. The second step is to normalize it. To normalize it, to say, oh, wow, this is something that's been going on for a while. This is completely normal, given my upbringing, given what I've been through, given the fact that I'm a woman and I've been conditioned this way. Other women have responded in this way. I'm not the only one who's keeping myself quiet. I'm not the only one who's not living a confident life. There are lots of women doing these things. And it's normal we've been doing these things, given what's happened during history, over history, given what's happened in our culture today, given what's happened in my childhood. And there's going to be some exercises we do to help normalize our doubt, normalize the discomfort around things. And the third thing is just to nurture ourselves. The third thing is to take some positive step to provide ourselves with some comfort and some nurturing. And so like in this picture, you can place your hand on the heart. You can say, may I be kind to myself right now. I'm having all these uncomfortable emotions. I'm noticing my embodied doubt, this is hard. May I be kind to myself right now? And start to give yourself feelings of comfort and nurturing, just like you would send to a friend. And so, if you had a friend that was trying to build a new pathway, if you had a friend that was trying to shift out of doubt, out of confidence, what would you say to them? And allowing yourself to say those things to yourself. The benefits of self compassion, there are numerous ones. It calms that inner critic, it improves resiliency. Like I said, that ability to actually take on bigger goals, go after bigger things because you know you're going to be there for yourself. It improves relationships. So, a lot of times, if we have a harsh inner voice, if we're speaking harshly towards ourselves, that is actually reflected in how we treat other people. There's a lot of wisdom around that adage. You have to love yourself first before you can love others. And so it improves your relationships. And that's something I've noticed for myself personally. As I've increased my ability to be compassionate towards myself, I've increased my ability to be compassionate towards those I love. Less harshness towards myself equals less harshness towards the people in my life as well. And it's correlated with confidence. So it's actually proven that self compassion is a cousin of confidence. The more compassionate you are towards yourself, the more confidence you have in your life. Self compassion is both a practice and a trait. So there are some of us who are born with just a greater natural ability to be more self compassionate. But if you don't have that, I certainly didn't have that, then you can practice self compassion. You can set aside time in your day to cultivate that skill. And we're going to do that through a practice that's coming up.